Alrighty. So I just want to say bienvenidos and welcome. I want to remind all attendees to please sign in. Don't forget to sign in. If you are a student, getting extra credit for a class or faculty or staff attending, please don't forget to click that link into the chat shared by Jessica Alvarez. And if you have any issues, just please direct message her. If you have any questions during the course of the presentation/performance, please direct them to Priscilla and we'll address them at the conclusion of the presentation during Q&A. Also, before we all log off today, it's very important that everyone completes the short survey that's going to be shared into the chat. That's also going to be shared by Jessica, okay? Maybe about 5 to 10 minutes before the event ends. So your feedback is really important to us. So we hope that you can complete a survey for us. And lastly, this event is going to be recorded, so please adjust your settings to your preference. Okay, so before I introduce our speaker, I want to go ahead and offer a land acknowledgement on behalf of the Planning Committee. Every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will. Some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life. And some have lived on this land for more generations that can be counted. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We begin this effort to acknowledge what has been buried by honoring the truth. We are currently occupying ancestral land of the Tongva people. In our work to promote social justice, in education, we must always consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that brings us here together today. With that being said, I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's presentation for Latinx Heritage Month. This is Glendale Community College's second year observing Latinx Heritage Month, and our theme this year is celebrating our diverse stories, voices, and identities. And the Planning Committee selected this theme to celebrate the unique individuals within the Latinx community, despite the various challenges that they faced in this country. I'm going to share my screen really quickly just to show you the Cultural Diversity Latinx Heritage Month webpage. This will also be shared in the chat, and feel free to hop onto this webpage to learn a little bit more about the different events that we're going to be having, not just this week, but for entire Latinx Heritage Month. Just as a reminder, we have several events coming up tomorrow and on Thursday. So tomorrow we're going to have a presentation that's titled Del Colegio Comunitario al Profesorado con mi familia, from the community college to the professoriate with my family, and that's going to be presented by Dr. Jose Del Real Viramontes. And there's also going to be a Latinx student panel that's going to be this Thursday, all right? And both of these events are flex and classified professional growth units eligible. And there are more, I won't go into it. Please feel free to jump on and learn more about our programming. I want to take the time now to introduce our performer and presenter today, which is none other than Yosimar Reyes. So Yosimar Reyes is a nationally acclaimed poet and public speaker. He was born in Guerrero, Mexico, and raised in Eastside San Jose. Reyes explores the themes of migration and sexuality in his work, and the Advocate named Reyes one of the 13 LGBTQ Latinos changing the world. And Remezcla included Reyes on their list of 10 up-and-coming Latinx poets you need to know. With that being said, it's my pleasure to introduce you all, Yosimar Reyes.
Hi, everybody. Buenas tardes. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to be here with all of you today. I am tuning in live from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm currently back into doing in-person events. So it's really interesting to kind of see how throughout the country we are all adjusting to what we're up against. Again, I'm super excited to be presenting for Latinx Heritage Month. I think it's very important that this month is in commemoration of just our culture, our cultura, the many things we do contribute to this country, and really uplifting the voices of a lot of us. I am a poet, a writer, and I predominantly write about my experiences growing up as a queer, undocumented immigrant in this country. But one of the interesting things that that I love to write about is more about kind of our power and just the way that we have managed to continue to thrive despite the adversities that we are faced by institutions. I know that right now is a very trying time for a lot of us. We're all going through different motions. We're all kind of grappling with different systems that sometimes feel that are not, built to our betterment. And so I just want to acknowledge that, and also acknowledge that I think now more than ever, it is very important to exist in relationship to one another and in community to one another, because I think even though I do speak about my own predicament as an undocumented immigrant, I'm also well aware that we are all kind of facing different systems, right? Because we are an intersection of identities, so we are impacted differently. But nevertheless, we are here to kind of celebrate um, our joint efforts to create a better, equitable world. I'll start off with a poem that I wrote a while ago, and it's called En el apartamento 26, apartment 26. I grew up in Eastside San Jose, Silicon Valley. I grew up in a predominantly undocumented community. It was apartment complexes. Everybody in my apartment was undocumented. And this poem is dedicated to the things we had to do. And it's very interesting right now, actually making the relationships. Right now, I know there's a lot of vaccination mandates, specifically in LA, right? You have to show proof of vaccination in order to go into a location. But what I found very interesting is, some people that, don't want to get vaccinated are kind of making fake vaccination cards. So in the spirit of kind of really trying to make those correlations, this poem is titled En el apartamento 26. Everybody knows that el apartamento 26, you can get your mica. There in that 2-bedroom apartment, you can become American, write your name and birthday on a piece of paper and come out with your social. There in this torn down apartment building, dreams come true. Here in this abandoned place with these forgotten people, we became legal by our own laws. Um, what's been very interesting in the pandemic as witnessing what's happening has been the fact that I think one of the things that goes without saying is that specifically undocumented workers have been the ones that have been deeply impacted. One, by all, I think right now what we're facing is like just especially for people that have intersecting identities, is that we are being impacted by different systems. For working class undocumented people, one, they don't qualify for the stimulus check. Two, they are facing evictions, high rents, the process of gentrification. On top of that, really facing kind of the way that the presidency that we just came out of was super xenophobic in the rhetoric and making such a hostile environment. And it continued to this administration, right? So even facing those sorts of things in San Jose specifically, the 4 zip codes that were disproportionately impacted by post-positive COVID cases happen to be zip codes populated by Latinos, specifically immigrants. And so I guess having to choose between work and safety, right? Many workers chose work because you have to work. How are you going to continue to feed your family if you can't work? So I think that's one of the things that came out of this kind of this moment. I write a lot about Eastside San Jose, where I'm from, specifically if you're not from San Jose, if you ever been, I think it's similar, if you're from Los Angeles, East LA, Boyle Heights, similar kind of demographics. But I write about my neighborhood simply because I feel like there wasn't enough stories capturing that. So I like to tell my story in that way. I'll read the next piece, and then we'll get into the presentation. We landed on Colmar Drive. When we arrived, we were the only Mexicans on the block. It's 1991, rap music is on the rise, so you can imagine a group of dark Mexicans, prietos desde la montaña de Guerrero, arriving to the east side. Everything was new to us, the tall buildings, the concrete streets, city lights, the noise, the people who spoke to us in English. Our block was mostly Samoans and Black folks, and in comparison to us, they seemed to have this whole living in America thing down. They lounge in the front porches, blasting music and playing dice. We locked ourselves in a 2-bedroom apartment, afraid of the world outside. The first people to cross were my mom, my tia Rosie, and mi tío Juan in 1989, that sent for us 2 years later. By us, I mean Selene, Erika, Bebe, my brother Marcos, and me. You know we Mexicans, because we like to procreate. The original plan was for my abuelitos to cross all 5 to bring us to them and then return home. But I guess that when we arrived, my abuelitos fell in love with the hood, so they decided to stay. Selena and Erica were the first ones to learn English. They were older, but quickly got into American hood fashion. You would think they would have learned from Inglés Sin Barreras Sept, but no, they didn't have money for that. Only dreamt one day to save enough to buy all 12 volumes. Selena and Erika, like every other Chola girl in the 90s, would sit by the radio and pen down their favorite songs. Mama Doña thinks I'm high maintenance because I don't like to sleep on the living room floor. In her Mexican reality, she cannot fathom the idea of a kid having his own room, much less any form of privacy. In this 2-bedroom apartment, privacy does not exist. We're piled up como sardinas enlatadas. The 2 bedrooms are rented out to day laborers from Puebla or Oaxaca, who each summer go back home, bringing their earnings to their pueblos. My abuelo Papatino stretches his old body over the living room couch. His feet dangle over the arm recliners because guess what? Sofas are not meant to be beds, just like floors aren't meant for that either. Abuela and I sleep on the floor. When night comes, she folds thick cobijas San Marcos, each with the design of an exotic animal, a peacock, a leopard, a panther. She wraps la cobija and stacks them up on top of one another, creating a makeshift cushion between our bodies and the hard floor. Mama Doña doesn't like to say that we're poor because she says it is an offense to God. She keeps a giant print Bible by our door. The letters are like mini Oscar de la Hoyas punching little Bible verses in your face every time you open it. She saw a segment on Despierta America which said the Bible next to the door is a great way to ward off bad energies coming to the house. But honestly, in this house, we should be more concerned over these goddamn roaches and not the evil spirits our chismosa neighbors drag in here. Don't get me wrong. It's not that I'm ungrateful or blaming her for us living in this living room. It's just that life sucks. It's my 16th birthday, and while all the kids at my school are learning how to drive and brag about how their parents are buying them their first car, I can't help but think why God is testing me. Stephanie's mom bought her a new car for her sweet 16. Every morning she drives past me down Story Road, honking and waving as I'm sweating bullets running to school. You would think she would stop to give me a ride, but no, that would be too much for her. She says, I would stop, but honestly, I gotta go to Starbucks first. And I know the lines are always so long. Plus, I don't like to be late to class. Besides, you look like you could use the exercise. Stephanie is the type of citizen I pray to God gets her citizenship revoked. When she tells me, oh, my parents want to go to Mexico for winter break. You're so lucky your parents can't go anywhere. I pray, please, Diosito, make someone steal her social. I mean, it's one thing to be poor, but it's another thing to be poor, gay, and undocumented. If oppression were an Olympic sport, I would take first place. It's like God, Jesus, the Holy Trinity, la Virgen de Guadalupe are up in heaven like, heaven is so boring. Let's start some drama. And they Googled me and found me as an experiment. Undocumented means I don't have papers, meaning because I was not born in this country, I don't have a social security number, even though I don't know anything about Mexico. I mean, I was 3 when I crossed. All I know where I come from, Guerrero, Mexico, is from these old VHS tapes mi tío René sends to my abuela. We sent him a camcorder we bought at Circuit City years ago, and he uses us to send us updates on people, how everyone is doing. He films dirt roads, around the houses, and all those people say they missed us, send us their greetings. They call us gringos. If only if they knew we're not living like gringos at all. People in Mexico think that we're living like people in magazines. They think that we're here drink. They think that our houses look like the pages of Better Homes and Gardens, and who is to blame them? Every one of our relatives calls to Mexico. They brag about their jobs and how well they're doing. I'm sitting in the living room, rolling my eyes at all their lies. Sí, aquí está muy chido. Ya me compré una troca. Trabajo mucho. Me gusta mucho. Mexicans are liars. We should be honest and tell the Mexicans on the other side how much it sucks to live here. Think about it. You leave your home country not knowing a lick of English. You arrive here with no money. Plus, you have to deal with the fact nobody wants you here. And that's not like you just hop over and someone greets you with a brochure. Welcome to the great United States of America. Here's a brochure for all the fun attractions. Please don't forget to visit Eastside San Jose, also known as Little Mexico. And on your way out, grab a complimentary churro. And remember, please keep your arms and legs inside the rides at all times. The United States is not responsible for any lost or stolen wages. Finding a job in this country is hard enough. Most of my tios wake up at 5 in the morning and walk to Home Depot down the street. On my way to school, I wave at them. You just see a herd of brown men either playing dice or staying vigilant as possible for employers looking for workers. It's kind of sad to see these grown men begging these white people for jobs. They bum rush their cars, and each in their broken English tries to give a lower price. The point here is to make simply enough for the next month's rent. Abuela says that I'm 16, that maybe it's time for her to take me to La Tropicana to get a green card. La Tropicana is a shopping center on Story and King. They built a Mi Pueblo supermarket, so naturally it became the hub for all the Mexicans in San Jose. It's somewhat funny that most kids born here have parents that take them to La DMV to get driver's permits, but when they turn 16, but man are taking me to Tropicana to commit a federal crime. Abuela says it's not always going to be like this. I want to believe her, but something tells me it's going to get a lot worse before it gets any better. So most of the stuff that I'm trying to write within this voice is when I was 16. I remember at 16 years old, I was so confused and I was so confused, but I was always so witty. I grew up in Eastside San Jose, predominantly neighborhood, the hood, and I was always been kind of more feminine presenting than all the boys, so people would try to tease me. But I think this is how I developed my sense of humor, because I had to defend myself, and if I made fun of myself first in my situation, nobody could make fun of it, right? So I think this is how I started developing the voice that I kind of write in. But all the stuff that you hear right there in that story is true. We lived in this apartment complex. My grandma and my grandfather. We rented out the 2 bedrooms. It was just constant frustration that I remember, because the world at 16, if you remember, we were 16, how everything was so confusing and you're barely coming to your own consciousness and new understandings. And also you want to be normal. You want to be an American. You want to be as American as possible and not stand out. I was already queer. Like, I didn't need no more attention. And so I think this is kind of why I started writing in this way. And I think right now, I think the most recent thing that's happening right now, I know that if you are in social media, you probably saw these images. They came out yesterday with at the border with the Haitian immigrants that are seeking asylum in the US. And it's kind of really sad that we are still depicting these images, right? These kind of horrific images of people trying to find safety for their families. And seeking asylum is, it's not a crime. So I think it's and as we are talking about immigration and undocumented immigrants and refugees, is really acknowledging that this issue impacts all of us globally, and not necessarily it's just a Latino issue, but it's something that impacts most of us, right? And also it's very important to also know that way that when it comes to deportation, Black undocumented immigrants are targeted and criminalized at a higher rate, right? So I think all of that is very important points when we are discussing immigration. This is my abuelita. If you don't follow me on social media, you probably seen her. If you follow me on social media, you probably seen her a bunch of times. There's always post her because she's so funny. But my grandmother and my grandfather are the ones that brought me to this country, again, when I was 3 years old. Again, I have DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. This is a program that about 800,000 students or people in general qualified for. Right now, it's at a standstill. They're not taking new applications. But, thankfully, I just got my renewal. So every 2 years, I pay the government $495. They gave me this permit. I could work. I'm here for another 2 years, able to work. So I'm really grateful for that ability. thanks to DACA, I think I was able to definitely move out access upward mobility. This is kind of like the thing that I think is very important to point out for a lot of students who are coming from working class backgrounds, that college in a way has become, go to college because we want to help our families better their living situation, upgrade the standard of living. And thankfully, I think through my work and dedication, I've been able to keep going and work and excel in my profession. That now my family does not longer have to live in the environment in which we grew up in, and now we actually navigating upward mobility, right? I think even now, I think I'm probably within my family, someone that's learning, right? And navigating credit score, financial literacy, really making sure that we start manifesting things to create some sort of, generational wealth. I think it's very important for us to talk about that because, oftentimes as immigrants, children of immigrants, these are things that are not taught to us. And so we are kind of left to figure out on our own. But I'm really grateful for the people that fought for DACA because that is the permit that allows me to, no longer live in the hood and help my family and continue to help my neighbors that continue to live in that neighborhood that I grew up in. 1988 was when I was born. Actually, it's my birthday tomorrow. Tomorrow I turned 33 years old. And in October, it marks 30 years since I arrived to this country. I came here when I was 3 years old. So 30 years that I've been in this country. And it's kind of a lot of people don't really ask me all the time, like, dude, you've been here for 30 years. Why haven't you adjusted your status? And I think it's this misconception that a lot of people have towards the immigration system, like there's some sort of line or somewhere you just sign up. And, like when you will go to the carniceria, you take out a number and you just wait for your number to be called so you can put your order. But it doesn't work like that, right? I think right now our country is really kind of confronting a lot of the systems that have been in place that create these conditions for people to migrate. And so I think that's what we're up against. I think, and even then, I think I'm very grateful that, in that time frame, I've been able to access different things. And I graduated from I was product of community college because I went to Evergreen Community College and then transferred to San Francisco State University. And that kind of changed my life and the way my journey into the professional world shifted, right? We crossed over in we crossed over in 1991. And again, my upbringing was pretty much Americanized. I grew up as American as everybody in I think by cultural household, I would call it. My grandparents didn't speak English, but all of our my nieces, my cousins all spoke English. We were little hood kids that kind of grew up in these neighborhoods. So us afuera in the street, in la calle, we spoke English, and inside we spoke Spanish. And at the time, California still had bilingual education. So that means that we were getting taught English and Spanish at the same time. So I can actually read, write in Espanol. But I think that was definitely a huge influence in my voice. Again, like many of you who also grew up in bicultural households, you can tell by the music. You can listen to Los Panchos, Los Bookies, and then switch up to Jodeci, Brandy within one next skip of a song. So this is kind of like how I describe my upbringing. My grandfather was always listening to boleros and, Pérez Prado and all of that. And then my cousins would always be listening to, rap, and all that music was kind of like what kind of raised us. And again, these are the two girls in the back. Those are my cousins, Celine and Erica. And there were definitely those girls in the 90s that we didn't have lyrics.com back then. They would definitely take out a notebook and try to rewind the song so we can actually get the lyrics. So it's very, 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 I have very fond memories about growing up in my neighborhood. This is my grandpa and my grandma and my grandfather. My grandma, I'm actually, because of COVID, I think we're all kind of collectively grieving of what's happening because of COVID. In initial cases, we were noticing that most of the high deaths were our elders that were passing away. I know I know a lot of friends that have grandparents or whatever that tested positive for COVID and then ended up not making it. And I think for me, I was living in LA at the time. That was one of my biggest fear. My grandma was still in the neighborhood that we grew up in. There is no way that you're gonna social distance in an apartment complex or in a complex where there's so many people. So I think that was my biggest fear. Like, how do I protect my grandmother? So I decided to move back to San Jose, and actually move out of that neighborhood into a much bigger place. Now I'm my grandmother's full-time caretaker, which I think is also, I think, another thing that I am very proud within our culture. I think in our upbringing as immigrants, I think there's this fond respect for elders. And I think that my grandma has a lot of caretakers because I watch her for her medicine, but there's neighbors that check in on her. There's people that make sure that she's good. And I think this speaks bigger to kind of community care and how we show up for one another despite not having a lot, we still show up and make sure that we take care of one another. So my grandfather passed away about 3 years ago, 3, 4 years ago. The last time I saw him was when I applied to advance parole, which is a stipulation that you can get through the DACA program. So if there's any undocumented students here or people that have DACA, there is an option to apply to advance parole so you can go visit your home country for humanitarian purposes. If you have somebody that's dying, employment, if you get hired to do something, or for education, if there's a program or conference that you get invited to, you can apply to this permit that allows you to actually leave the country and enter back legally. And I applied in 2016. I got accepted, and I was able to return home where my home country is, and that's the last time I saw my grandfather. What was also very heartbreaking and interesting, right, while we're all facing COVID, is the fact that a lot of our loved ones that did pass away from COVID, we could not be at their burial, right? Most people witness funerals through FaceTime, through Zoom. And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing. I'm not being able to pay your respects to somebody that had a deep impact in your life. And I think a lot of people kind of face that. But I like to remind people that in that same regard, that's the reality that a lot of undocumented people have been living since our arrival, because we cannot return back to our home countries. Many people have lost touch with their parents and are only communicating through FaceTime and go attend their funerals through a Zoom link, through a FaceTime. And I think that was the hardest thing for our family, that my grandfather, who basically gave everything for me to be who I am, we couldn't pay that respect, right, in burying him. But I'm hopeful that one day I can all return to where I'm from and pay my respects because of him and his sacrifice and his labor, is that I get to tell stories and write poems and tell people how amazing we are. But I think one of the things that it's very important for me is to pay it forward. And I'm trying to pay it forward in taking the best care of my grandma. My grandmother's still undocumented, but just because she's undocumented does not necessarily mean that I want the rest of her years to be spent her stressing out, or for her to think that this is all she is, right? I want my grandmother to think about possibilities, about how limitless we could be. So I think right now that's my urgency. My urgency is to show up in the best way as possible and provide the best care that I can for this old lady that's still going strong. So I'm really grateful for that. A lot of narratives are about fear. A lot of people like to ask me if I'm afraid of getting deported, if I'm afraid of getting arrested. But at this point, I realize that life is so short. I think we are realizing that it's so fragile, and anything, I think this is the moment that we're like, wow, like I really, really need to really reevaluate my values and really think about what is it that I want to manifest in my life. I think even in Instagram, you see all these people like manifest it, vision board it, put it on that. And that's what I've been doing as of late, like really, really thinking about possibilities. I grew up believing that there was a lot of things that I couldn't do because of my status, because of being poor, because of all these things. But I realized that that was just me policing my own imagination, and I needed to get rid of that, right? Toni Morrison tells us if you want to fly, you got to let go of things. And I had to let go of this like invisible ice agent that's in my head and really start thinking about the possibilities of things that I can do, right? Right now I have a book club. I just launched my LLC, my own company. So I think like really thinking about how limitless besides my status, I can still manifest things and really, really push for my family to, again, to have adequate living, adequate access to resources. Um, and then, yeah, I look back at this picture a lot because I think about this was so many of us. So many of us have pictures like this where, you know, we were little kids at one point. We have no understandings of the systems that were at place. We didn't have no understandings of the identities that we embody would somehow be challenged or somehow be a threat to a system. But I like to remind folks like, you know, if you on your path and you somehow lost motivation or you somehow lost an idea of what you want to be, think about that kid you used to be, who had all these ideals. Because I think that as children, we really, really, really do, you know, you ask kids what they want to be when they grow up and they say, I want to be a cat and a firefighter, you know, because the imagination is so boundless. And so I think like in that way, we really need to go back to those little kids, for that inspiration. Because I know that especially as students who go to universities and, you know, might feel imposter syndrome, or you might feel like you have, like, I have no, you know, it's one of the biggest things, like when you're in your English class and you don't know the sentence structure, you're not a strong writer, all these things, you start feeling like, oh, I didn't learn all this, or I'm not adequate. But the idea, I think that's more important beyond the structures, is the voice. I know that I felt like that when I was an English major. I was like, I can't formulate complex structures like everybody else. But thankfully, I had a professor that told me, you don't have to. You already have the voice. A lot of people can't writing. It's a technical thing. You just study it. You go to the writing center and you learn it. But what you cannot teach people is voice. You already have a powerful story, a powerful narrative that if you're able to hone it in, you're going to be able to transform the way people view you, and you're going to even be able to transform the way you view yourself. So I think that's why it's more important to less focus on your lived experience and documenting that, and then the structure y todo lo demás will come later. But really, really honor the stories that you come from. And yeah, again, history teaches us that immigration is kind of a slow progress. Right now, we were really hopeful that what was going to happen with this new spending bill, because it had an immigration component in it. Yesterday, it came out that it's not going anywhere. I always tell people to be cautiously optimistic when it comes to immigration. I think one of the biggest things that I stopped really focusing on is putting all my high hopes in that, but I started putting it more into my community and putting it more into really looking at people that are trying to shift, the way that we are seen. So I would encourage you to that. I know that policy is very important, has a huge impact on our lives, but for your own emotional, mental, well-being, I think also look at people who are on the ground and be inspired by the people who are doing grassroots work that are doing amazing in changing, the way, we view ourselves. So I think that's very, very important. Um, again, one of the biggest things that I also like to think about right now, that I always encourage people to really think about, is what's allyship, right? One of the things that we're noticing right now, especially how we have commodified, woke language or activism or social justice vernacular, is the fact that, you know, we don't know what is performative allyship and what is actually showing up for people. A lot of times people ask me, what can I do for you to better your situation, right? And it's not necessarily what can you do for me. I think more people should read. My thing is like, read a book about our experience, someone that writes from us, read something about us and learn, educate yourself on that. People think that we need to do these grand gestures or these grand things of showing up. But honestly, at this point and what's at stake with everything that we're facing, I think being just a good neighbor, showing up for the people that are next to you that you know are struggling. If you have the ability to translate a document for a vecina, doing that. If you have the ability to Google where the nearest food bank is for a family that might be struggling, helping out with that. I think that's how we better kind of take care of each other instead of these really big things, right? We all have the capability. Also, kindness is a big thing. We're all stuck. And I think one of the biggest ugly things that's happening right now is all these videos of people mistreating workers. And it's so sad that people live in this hierarchical mentality that somehow the lady making your Subway sandwich does not deserve the same respect as somebody else. I think like it's really showing up that kindness. And again, also tipping, right? It's very important. If you are buying a raspado, make sure you tip the person, and get into the habit of that, because that $1 can definitely make a difference in the lives of these immigrants that are trying to make it. And so what's next for me? I think one of the biggest things is manifesting joy, happiness. I can tell you so many, like I tell you in the first piece, I can tell you the so many ways I've struggled. I can tell you the uh, most tragic Rosa de Guadalupe storyline of my life. I can definitely go into details and make you feel like you need to adopt me. But I think what I want to manifest more than anything is joy. I realize that at my age right now, I don't want my legacy to be struggle. I want my legacy to be the ways that I'm pushing to thrive and survive despite the adversities. That's what I want my legacy to be. So when I do tell my story and my story of self, yes, you will know the trials that I've been through, but you also know the successes and the victories and the reclaiming of the genius that I embody. I think that's the biggest thing. When we grow up poor, undocumented, or as a marginalized identity, we don't really start thinking the way that we also give away our power by thinking that that's all we are. Like, oh, I'm just a poor person, I just grew up poor. No, yes, we were poor, but we actually learned there was a lot of cultural wealth and the cultural values that we were taught. And that's why I don't really stress a lot too much, because I already know that the hardest parts of my life, I already lived them. I already been through the worst part of my life. Right now, one of the biggest things is I definitely want to figure out how to manifest abundance in my life. So I think 2020 and 21, I was telling people that my favorite word was abundance. Abundance. There's plenty, and I can manifest that. So again, I know I don't want to sound though like, oh, I want you to go out and buy your crystals and align your chakras y todo eso, but I also want to really think about, yeah, what is it that you want to manifest? What the biggest question that I think one of my mentors asked me was, what does success mean to you, and how do you know when you become successful? And I think that is very important. We got to define it for ourselves, right? You define success, what it means to you. um, and that way, when you do reach it, you already have a measure and you're not constantly chasing. And for me, my success was getting my grandma out the hood and being able to take care of her, and I achieved that already. So I think now it's like, okay, now I got to set new goals and new intentions to put out into the world. So I hope that you are as students are, currently pursuing higher education, you're aware that this will grant you access to navigating more resources or being able to help the communities that you come from. And hopefully, again, when you do reach those level, I always talk about, you're going to be like the policymakers, the educators, whatever field you go into, you're going to be the ones working with communities that don't have access, but you also remember where you come from, and provide assistance to the people that have lifted you, and fed your spirit. So hopefully that is what manifests. But yeah, this is kind of a little bit about the work, what I'm doing. And right now, again, I'm so grateful for that I'm able to tour and get to do these conversations with different folks. You can find more of my work on my website. This is called Undocujoy. It's a video that we developed with Define American, a media and culture organization based in Los Angeles that focuses on storytelling. You can find that on my website, but Undocujoy in essence was a project that we launched where we actually wanted to capture undocumented people smiling and laughing and doing activities that bring them peace or give them a mental break. And hopefully that also encourages other people to, you know, take a break for themselves and rest up. You know, if you need to go do your little social media break, in which you just delete all your accounts for a couple of days, definitely do that. I think it's important because right now we're just so bombarded with so much information, that it's so easy to get lost in all the noise. So yeah, you can, these are some of my book recommendations. I also have a book club, the Yosi Book Club, which you can definitely join through my Instagram. And the Yosi Book Club is dedicated to promoting contemporary Latinx authors. We promote books that are published within the last 2 years. And we also kind of indulge in conversations with the authors. One of the biggest books that I recommend to everybody, should you want to be interested in reading from someone that comes from our lived experience, is The Undocumented Americans by Carla Cornejo Villavicencio. It's a beautiful book. Carla is an amazing writer that talks about, you know, the people that, you know, are in the shadows, the workers, the undocumented workers. So I always recommend that book to everybody. If you're a professor in here, you should definitely assign that book to your class because there's so much knowledge in there. The other one is Children of the Land by Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, follows his journey as an undocumented person, a DACA beneficiary, returning back to Mexico on advance parole to adjust his status, but more like the kind of like the mental, emotional that happens to the undocumented body. And The Body Papers by Grace is also a great book that talks about being Filipina undocumented, and also kind of being a cancer survivor. So really going into public health and all of that. So these 3 books I definitely recommend should you be interested in indulging in that. I love books. I think literature is the way that we're gonna better understand ourselves, right? I think that before you speak about a community that you are not in relationship with, you just should read an author from that community. That way you don't look wild on the internet making assumptions about people that you don't really know. Um, but yeah, you can join the book club. And yeah, you'll find all the books that we're currently promoting. Most of my stuff is on my website, yosimar.com, or you can choose to follow me on Instagram at yosirey, where you'll find a whole host of mess and stuff. But yeah, now we will definitely open it up to questions, comments, or anything. I would love to, yeah, answer.
Thank you so much, Yosimar. So one of the questions we have is, how did you begin to write? Did you always know it was what you wanted to do?
I began because of my English teacher I was a junior in high school, and she signed me up for a poetry competition because she knew that I had writings in a journal. And she was the one that pushed me. I was super shy. Obviously in high school, I was super shy because I was a nerd. Facing all these things. I think I spent like my junior year, I didn't talk at all. I just didn't want to talk. I just didn't have an interest in talking. I facing so much. But she signed me up, and I think my poem won $50. And I was like, oh, that's cool. They gave me $50. And then she's like, I'm gonna start a poetry group. And then we got a bunch of other little immigrant hood kids, and we started a poetry group, and we started competing against high schools, reading poems. And it was pretty awesome. Honestly, I'm so grateful to my English teachers because they definitely really provided a space for us. And that's how I began developing my voice and kind of thinking like, oh, actually people really want to know about where I come from. People want to be identified. So I think it was just supposed to be like something that we were doing as teenagers, but it gradually grew because then I graduated, and then I started doing events on my own. And yeah, that's how I kind of started slowly developing.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Yosimar. One of the next questions is, you mentioned the power of language, immigrant power, and cultural power in your work. Did you always feel like you had this in you, or what, or who inspired you to have this power?
Yeah, honestly, no. When I was growing up, I didn't know. I thought we were just poor immigrants. Like I didn't see nothing past that. Like I was like, this sucks. My life sucks. Like, why am I waking up to, when you're, I don't know if you grew up like me, but you grew up in an immigrant household when you wake up at 6 a.m. and you're sweating because the kitchen is always on and it's a hot summer day and your grandma is deciding to cook caldo and you're just sweating, perspiring because it's just like so hot. I just remember that. Those are like how I remember my upbringing, but I didn't think of it as much. But I think gradually, as I started reading more books by authors of color, I realized like, wow, like actually, this feels good. Like it feels good. Like The House on Mango Street, which is a really common book that we all read. Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anara, like all these books that I felt like, wow, they're speaking about my experience. And that's how I started noticing the patterns of like, oh, there's a lot of cultural commonalities. And if I'm able to really tap into the specific of my life, a lot of people are going to identify it. And so I think that's how I slowly started thinking of like, actually, we do have power because if we didn't, we wouldn't be such a threat. So that's where I started shifting my understanding of what, I tell people I'm a genius just because, it's true. Like it takes a certain level of genius to navigate everything that we've been able to navigate. So definitely language is definitely very, very important when, and I think the other thing that happens with us as immigrants and Latinos is that we get taught to not brag, right? It looks bad when you're bragging, when you call yourself big things. Like, no, you need to be humble, right? Which is great. Humility is great, but if you're too humble, people take advantage of you. So it's very important to remind yourself and other people who you are and really let them know, like, no, you're talking to a genius, so please respect my genius. Because that's the other way that we also build confidence and really build, you get rid of that imposter syndrome that we all face. Like, why do you have imposter syndrome? And then you notice that the people that are supposed to have imposter syndrome don't have it. And you're like, girl, how do you feel so brave to say that? But just things to think about.
Yeah, definitely. So our next question is, was it hard for you to be vulnerable when writing your poems?
I think, yeah, I think it's hard because for me right now, sometimes I'll put it on Facebook. Sometimes my poetry comes a lot sadder, but it's because I'm processing emotion. And what's that, it's for me, what's all the difference about being vulnerable is that you don't want people to feel sorry for you. I don't want people to feel sorry for me. You shouldn't feel sorry for me, right? I want people to empathize and to be reminded of their own humanity through the writing. So I think it's very hard. There's a fine line of like, if I'm opening up about something really, really intimate, then people are like, oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened to you. Or I don't need that, right? For me, it's more like, no, I want to connect in a deeper level. So I think really, really thinking about, again, us, how we look at people. I think when we look at people as pobrecitos, we rob them of their agency. So making sure that you're like, hey, I don't know what that experience is like, but I just want to tell you that I see you and I feel you and thank you for sharing that. Simple as that. I don't like, because sometimes I'll do share a poem and then people put like, oh my God, sad emoji, sad. I'm like, girl, I'm already sad. Don't put me no sad emojis. But yeah, I think that's a better way of, people responding to the work. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Another question is, how was your experience going to Mexico after leaving at the age of 3? And you can share whatever you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, that was okay. First of all, I didn't know that I was gonna go, but see, this is how I know. Like, I went through Define American, and I know that my coworkers did something because they knew how monumental it was gonna be. I missed my flight because I hadn't gotten my permit yet, and I'm like, dude, I can't go. It's so close, and they haven't sent me my permit. And I can't leave the country without this little paper because if I don't have this paper, I can't come back in. And I think my coworkers, they're like, oh, no worries, we're gonna book another flight. And they booked a flight. And honestly, I think they didn't tell me, but I'm sure they did it. They got me like a first class flight to return to Mexico. So I was first class. And they were serving enchiladas, which was very on theme. But I think arriving was definitely super, super frustrating, yeah, amazing, right? Here I am thinking that I make a joke in my play that I think I'm going to the moon because it's just so far distant in my imagination that I can't access it to, where the flight is closer than going to Portland, you know, it's so short. And I think going back really made me realize, one, how Americanized I already am, right? Like, yes, Mexico is my home country, but it's so different. It's vastly different than what I'm used to. And also, I think a fondness of being able, I think I'm so grateful that I got to do that because I was able to see from my grandfather for one last time and really, really, you know, spend time with him and hang out with him. But I also realized that, you know, when I say I want to go home, home is not necessarily a place. It's not a physical place. It's not a building. It's not a walls. Home is the people that I love. Home is the people that are around me, my friends, my community. Home is the people that inspire me when I'm sad. That's what home is to me. It's not a country. It's not that. So I think that's what made me realize that. Because I thought that I was going to have some spiritual awakening. And I'm here like, I think I couldn't enjoy my trip because in my head I thought like, what if I get stuck here? You know, what if they don't let me back into the US and this is the rest of my life? How am I gonna adapt? So I think that's the realization. The, you know, home sometimes is not, it's not a place. It's like the people that are around you. So yeah.
Beautifully said. Thank you, Yosimar. And then one of our last questions is, what has been your biggest obstacle towards your educational path, and how can you inspire community college students in their education, especially when encountering personal obstacles?
I think one of the biggest ones has been sometimes I feel like my pride when I was in school because I felt like I didn't want to ask for help, right? Because I didn't want people to think that, I don't know, I was like, I'll figure it out on my own. And honestly, I shouldn't have done that because there's so many people that already, I always tell students, honestly, if you're struggling with something, whether that be, you know, that, hey, I was really hard on myself. If I got a B, or I remember I flunked one of my classes because I was doing so much, working 2 jobs, and I was, you know, still performing, doing all this stuff. And I just felt so depressed and so like, that just gutted me. Like, how did I feel like such a failure? Because I failed one of my classes. But I think asking for help is definitely one of the biggest challenges that sometimes we have because we like to be really self-reliable. But I always say, like, you know, there's people that are there to help, and there's people that want to help you, not because they feel sorry for you, but because they see themselves in you, themselves in you. They're like, oh, I used to be that, like I used to be that. So I think asking for help. The other thing for me was resources. I always felt like, oh my God, how am I going to pay for school? Like, it's so difficult. It's so hard. Thankfully, right, I think right now there's, in California, there's a lot of undocumented resource centers. There's a lot of more access to scholarships. You know, Immigrants Rising is a great organization that does a lot of work. But again, I think just asking like, hey, I have this problem. I don't know if you can better assist me. And I think now with people are a little bit more open to that. So I think my biggest thing was, I think that also not building, I was in San Francisco State and I was that student that was like, I'm not here to make friends, I'm here to graduate. So sometimes I didn't necessarily invest in building community. But I think honestly, it makes a difference when you are building community within schooling because yes, of course, you're going to stay up, you know, writing your papers together and probably you're going to be just chismeando instead of writing. But I think that also feeds the spirit of that experience, right? Learning needs to be a pleasurable experience. It needs something enjoyable. It should be something that you look forward to as opposed to just another task after task. So I think really not losing that love for education can make the, you know, the difference in your educational experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Kevin.
Well, thank you so much, Yosimar, for celebrating yet another Latinx Heritage Month with us again this year. It's been awesome. You're so inspiring, and I think I speak for GCC when I say thank you for coming yet again to speak with us and to present and to perform your poetry and really just inspiring us. So thank you so much. Let's go ahead and give him a virtual round of applause. Also a virtual round of applause to all of you all, our attendees today. Thank you so much for coming. We hope you really enjoyed our event today. We have a lot of events coming up for the remainder of Latinx Heritage Month, including an awesome lecture by Dr. Jose Viramontes. So that's going to be at 5 p.m. tomorrow. We hope to see you there. All right. Jessica, I believe, entered a survey into the chat. So please, before you leave today, go ahead and click on that link, open up that survey, and please complete it for us. And I also added a couple of links into the chat, connecting you all with our GCC library. They have a campus guide for Latinx Heritage Month, as well as some of Yosimar's work that's on loan in the library as well. So thank you all for coming and hope you have a great evening. Take care. And thank you again, Yosimar.